A free and fair election or an unfair foregone conclusion? As ballots are counted in Ethiopia's national vote, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed prepares for a sweeping victory. But will more years in power mean peace or increasing conflict within the country and the region? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's newsmaker is Ethiopia. Well, Ethiopia is a sometimes confusing tapestry of ethnicities and languages with an unfortunate history of armed conflict. In spite of a Nobel Peace Prize winning Prime Minister, insurgencies in Tigray, Amhara, and Oromia persist, and fears of an all-out war with some of Ethiopia's neighbors loom large. The internal insecurity has meant dozens of constituencies were excluded from Monday's election, and Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed is expecting to secure some 90% of the national vote. So what will his extended rule mean for Africa's second most populous country? Here's a look.
8 years ago, Abiy Ahmed promised to build a new Ethiopia. This week's election was the clearest test yet of that promise, not because the result was in doubt, but because the country he set out to transform remains divided over the direction he chose. When Abiy came to power in 2018, he promised to move beyond the ethnic political system that had shaped Ethiopia for decades. He called for a stronger, center, and more unified state. For a time, the project appeared to be working. Political prisoners were released, relations with Eritrea were restored, and Abiy won the Nobel Peace Prize. But building a new political order meant confronting the old one. For nearly 3 decades, the Tigray People's Liberation Front had been one of Ethiopia's dominant political forces. Abiy's rise challenged that dominance and set the stage for a confrontation that would reshape the country. In 2020, tensions between Addis Ababa and TPLF erupted into civil war. Hundreds of thousands were killed in the conflict, which became the defining crisis of Abiy's leadership. Although a peace agreement was signed in 2022, the consequences remained visible. Tigray remains under an interim administration established after the war. The war also transformed political alliances. In Amhara, forces that once fought alongside federal troops against the TPLF eventually turned against Addis Ababa. Oromia reflects a similar debate over power and autonomy. Government forces continue to battle the Oromo Liberation Army as that struggle plays out on another front. Those tensions were never far from the surface. Security incidents were reported in Oromia and Amhara on election day, with voting suspended at some polling stations.
To prevent the election from being peaceful as planned, Ethiopia's historical enemies have brought and deployed the forces they control and have carried out propaganda. They have tried to make us believe that democratic elections are not possible in Ethiopia. However, as the Ethiopian people always show, they are holding elections in every way I have seen, demonstrating the great heroism they show at crucial times.
Yet conflict alone cannot explain Abiy's political dominance. Under his leadership, Ethiopia has pursued major economic reforms and ambitious infrastructure projects. And for supporters, his achievements remain central to the story of the last 8 years.
We have confidence in our leaders. Our Prime Minister is a leader who can lead the world, who has achieved remarkable feats in the global arena and has been honored with international acclaim. This extraordinary leader can lead not only Ethiopia, but also the world.
Critics disagree. They see the conflicts in Tigray, Amhara, and Oromia not as separate crises, but as evidence that Ethiopia's underlying political tensions remain unresolved.
I don't think we need to go far to see the destructive damage to our nation caused by ethnic politics. The crises we have witnessed in the past years speak for themselves. We have seen citizens being attacked because of their identity. We have seen them being persecuted simply for living in areas deemed by others not to be theirs. We believe that our country is an example of how ethnic politics is bad.
This election may have reaffirmed Abiy's power, but the Ethiopia he set out to build remains unfinished.
Joining me now to comment on the election and the state of security in Ethiopia is, from Addis Ababa, advisor to Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed on Eastern African affairs and former president of the Tigray Interim Regional Administration, Getachew K Reda. Thank you so much for being with us. Greatly appreciated. First, I have to say, when anyone hears a politician is, getting 80 to 90% of the national vote, especially in a country that's as divided as Ethiopia, there will logically be doubts as to the fairness of that very election. So can you say now that this election has been fair?
Well, for one thing, I have never heard of any announcement as to who has won and by what percentage. And that said, having been in politics in this country for the last 20 or so years, there were times when a ruling party, which I belonged to, won 90-something% of the votes. There are explanations for this. I know the optics and everything doesn't sound right. That doesn't look right. And I am not particularly proud of people winning 90% of the votes. But for one thing, the system, the electoral system in this country is first past the post, where multiplicity of candidates would simply mean the one with a higher number of votes. It doesn't have to be 80%, it doesn't have to be 50%, and every district gets to win the seat, which ultimately means even those who have won multiplicity of popular votes would end up not gaining a single seat. It could be unfair. That arrangement could be unfair, but that's what the Constitution is. That's what happens in other parts of the world, including Western democracies as well.
Okay.
But another explanation is when you have parties who are more interested in fair weather politics, the incumbent often has advantage over fair weather politicians who just start campaigning and canvassing 4 or 5 months before.
Fair enough. Then why? Then tell me, as far as winning this huge majority is concerned, which again most are expecting. You say you won't be surprised at all. Tell us what you think is so wrong with the opposition. Why are they losing so badly?
Look, I will tell you this. Millions of people support the Prime Minister and his policies. And there are also millions who oppose his policies for whatever reason it is. But this particular election, as far as I'm concerned, is not so much a test of how popular he is as how much people are disgruntled about, uncomfortable about even, low-key conflicts, violence everywhere. I was in Jimma the other day, and I am in Addis, and I saw elections at least in Jimma and in Addis. People were voting in droves, like I could see. In some areas, I know of some opposition elements is trying to stop the voting, even through the use of firearms and everything, explosives. But I know of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people braving those kinds of efforts to cast their votes. And I have reason to believe that as much as there are millions of people who support the Prime Minister and his policies, and they vote accordingly, but I have also reason to believe that millions more, despite their opposition to his policies or the ruling party's policies, would still be disgusted with the kind of violence that has become rampant in some part of the country. So it was as much about endorsement of his policies as it was rejection of violence. And I didn't vote for obvious reasons, because I came here from Tigray, and Tigray is not holding elections. But
Okay.
I would still vote against violence, not
Sure, but
necessarily
we have to keep
particularly
in
for
mind
the.
that all parties involved have been accused of various atrocities, from the government to those opposition military groups. But the opposition, meanwhile, the political opposition is arguing that your government has really done everything possible to undermine them, including through, restricting media freedom. Is there some truth to that?
Well, look, like I told you, wherever I went, there were representatives of parties. Like I told you, I have been involved. I have been involved in politics for the last 20 years, and we had conducted about 5 elections, and none of the elections were immune from the kinds of allegations and accusations that are being thrown around. So
Okay.
I cannot really say this is the most stellar democratic exercise in the world. Far from that. But then again, the parties, as far as I know, despite their own weaknesses, have been canvassing for elections. Whether that nearly amounted to the kinds of successful campaign an incumbent would do is an entirely different matter. But the incumbent has some achievements to its name. But I think the vote, like I told you, it's not entirely about the achievement of the incumbent as much as it's about rejection of violence in some parts of the country, in many parts of the country.
Okay. I mean, we have to remember as well that some of the most violent areas in the country right now were excluded from this election, including northern Tigray.
No. I will tell you this. This is what's kind of mind-boggling to me. In Amhara region and in Western Oromia, there are low intensity conflicts, if you will. You can call them this and that, but people, people wanting to vote, but the very people who are fighting in their name try to stop them from voting. I don't exactly understand.
Blame who you.
I have
may.
nothing against whatever cause they say they have, but trying to stop people from voting by
blame who
throwing
you may.
explosives.
The constituents there will not be able to vote, and meanwhile they desire the representation that they feel they need in the federal government, not least in Tigray. So what, based on that, what do you make now of the prospect of a return to war with the TPLF, your former party, and this adding to the frustration of those that feel marginalized in Tigray, even more so because they couldn't even participate in an election?
No, by the way, I totally agree with you. Any sense of marginalization would lead to some kind of conflict. But in this particular case, what I'm saying is, in many areas in Oromia and Amhara, despite some of the opposition trying to stop the people were voting anyway, whether it is to vote the incumbent out of power or to vote for it. Will remain to be seen, but at least people wanted to vote despite pressures from opposition otherwise. In the case of Tigray, it's a different ballgame, I should say, because in Tigray, the party, my former party, as it were, has abandoned all notions of fair play and justice and try to take over every walks of life in Tigray by conducting a coup against the interim administration and the interim president there who took over from me is in a situation where he cannot do anything about it, and this leadership cannot ensure security. And without the level of security that's required, even the National Electoral Board announced that in some parts of Amhara and some parts of Oromia, this was a difficulty. But in the case of Tigray, it's an absolute impossibility for elections to be conducted. But elections need to be conducted, and soon.
You call it a coup. Does that to say that you harbor your own resentment toward them for your ouster, and that perhaps excluding their participation works in your favor?
Honestly, I don't want to personalize this. I'm not particularly angry about my ouster, as it were. I tried as much as I could to introduce some element of sanity to our politics. I probably failed, not miserably, but I failed. So my departure was long overdue as far as I'm concerned, because it was a 2-year term and then that 2 year had expired. But the reason why I'm saying that, well, the guy who took over did everything to take over from me. And if I had to be angry, I would equally, if not more, be angry at him. And
Okay.
that's not the case. But as long as there are institutions, some level of predictability and stability requires that we abide by some rules, right? What the TPLF leadership, whatever this ramp TPLF leadership has done, is to conduct a coup and install itself as a legitimate. But that's not. So it cannot ensure security that would be conducive for free and fair election, whatever that means.
Getachew Reda. Very unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there because that's all the time we have for this segment of the Newsmakers. So I'd like to thank you so much for being with us. Let's broaden out the discussion now and welcome 3 new panelists. Joining me from Washington is International Relations Specialist Meaza Gebremedhin. From Toronto, Senior Analyst and Director of Communications at the Amhara Association of America, Robel Alemu. And from Frankfurt, journalist and founder of the Addis Standard newspaper, Tsedale Lemma. Thank you all so much for being with me. Meaza, I just need to start with you as a Tigrayan yourself and tell me what you made of the exchange you just heard with the advisor to the Prime Minister.
Not surprising that a member of the current regime has, of course, to justify and present the elections the way he did. So there are no any surprise, but just I think it's a bit disingenuous to say that the reason why elections didn't take place in Tigray is because of any particular political party, rather the ongoing conflict happening in Tigray. Despite the Pretoria Agreement, Tigray is still home to the most stable region. There are no peace and stability in the region. So the very basic conditions for election haven't been made because of the action and inactions of the political parties, including the Ethiopian government. So I find it a bit disingenuous to put the blame only on the TPLF while completely absolving the Ethiopian government of its role.
Okay. Tsedale, you have 50 million registered voters, more or less, across Ethiopia, but dozens of these constituencies, including in Tigray, couldn't cast a ballot because of the insecurity that some say the government is responsible for. So do you think this election can be considered fair?
Thanks for having me. I don't think it's considered fair. But I also don't think that this is an election that would bring in the peace and stability the country needs. Mr. Getachew might serve this panel well if he has said what was the achievement of the last election, how is the peace situation in Ethiopia since the 2021 election. Or, if anything, it has gotten worse. Tigray was not part of that election in 2021 as well, and it's not a part of this election. And that's precisely why the election is not a means to achieve the peace and stability the country needs at the moment.
Let me ask you then, is it possible that this is the only alternative, though, that Ethiopia has? Is it the best Ethiopia can do when the alternative might be just balkanization of the country?
There is a better alternative. Yes, of course, I mean, constitutionally, elections need to happen, but we have tried to do that election without having constituent members of the federation involved in the 2021 election. And the violence has increased, actually quadrupled. If we look into the accolades report from 2022 to today, it has gone up. And by the way, 75% of the violence, the armed violence in the country that was registered in the last 5 years, was perpetrated by the government forces. So there is a better way that the government has always been told, which is that we need to have a political settlement, a dialogue, a genuine dialogue first, and an agreed upon roadmap on what elections should be and who should and how it should be conducted and how free and fair the election should be. There is no agreement on what elections are supposed to bring in and who is, even the electoral board that is conducted in managing the election does not enjoy the trust that it requires among all stakeholders in the country. So the better alternative is to solve this problem first through dialogue and a political settlement. And that's why Tigray is not a part of this election, by the way. There is no active conflict in Tigray today. But because the political crisis has not been solved, Tigray is still not a part of this election. So we need to solve that first before elections.
Okay. And Robel, talk to us about Amhara. And what you think their position is here, knowing that a number of constituencies in that state were also kept out of this election. Do you think the government has undermined the opposition there, or is the opposition there to blame for its own kind of fragmentation and lack of strong representation?
Thank you, Andrea. What transpired on Monday was more of a simulation of democracy because the current reality in Ethiopia couldn't be the furthest thing from it. And to understand this, if we just look at the Abiy Ahmed administration's human rights record, it is among the worst worldwide. So as an example, in the Amhara region, which has faced more than 5 years of armed conflict, and over the last 3, with involvement of state forces under Ahmed's Oromo Prosperity Party regime, we've seen daily atrocities. Last month, the Lemkin Institute issued an active genocide alert, calling Ahmed's war on the Amhara people genocidal. And our own organization has recorded over 370 aerial strikes by state forces targeting health centers, schools, homes, sites of worship, and other civilian targets, resulting in thousands of casualties. A recent BBC report from a small sample of health centers identified thousands of cases of rape in Amhara, with the majority of cases implicating state forces. And then last week, we had the Safeguarding Health and Conflict Coalition releasing a report that revealed escalating attacks on healthcare. UNICEF has reported over 9 million children out of school across the country, with half of that figure coming from Amhara. And then in neighboring Oromia, attacks have continued against ethnic Amhara and Orthodox Christian communities, including on election day when there was an active massacre taking place in the RC area implicating local militants. And then in the Wedlega area, you have ongoing attacks and siege-like conditions by federal and Oromia region forces. So there's a very, very serious human rights crisis. There's a lack of political pluralism, no freedom of expression, a closed civic space, no free press. You have thousands of people arrested for their Amhara identity, political beliefs, or in some cases, no stated reason at all. And among them are opposition figures, members of parliament, independent journalists, civil society leaders who face very severe abuses.
Let me ask Meaza then. I mean, we just heard about the internal dynamics and the challenges there. There's also the question of external dynamics and the fear some have that this prime minister could start a war with Eritrea. And by sweeping this election as he's expected to, how empowered he might feel to start that conflict with Eritrea, because he has said he will have that Red Sea port that is on Eritrean territory.
Yeah, I mean, it's important to understand that Eritrea by itself is not a benign actor in all of this. Of course, Eritrea has played a critical role in supporting the Ethiopian regime during its genocidal expedition in Tigray. So Eritrea is indeed a very warmongering actor, but at the same time, like you said, the current Ethiopian administration seems to be hell-bent on having access to the Red Sea, and not legally, but through force. So, of course, there are increased tensions between both actors, but the most alarming thing for me or to highlight is the fact that this war, if indeed it carries on, it will take place on the lands of Tigray, on the bodies of Tigrayan women, on the bodies of Tigrayan men, as it did last time. So I think it's really important to understand that there is a marginalized group that is under imminent threat of once again being a war ground, while two actors in Ethiopia and Eritrea continue to march on their war expeditions. And at the same time, I think in my understanding, the very reason why the Ethiopian government as well as the Eritrean regime continues to be emboldened and seems to see war and only war the way to achieving their political goal is because they haven't been held accountable for all the crimes that they committed during the Tigray genocide. And of course, if there is no justice and accountability for crimes that they committed previously, they're further emboldened to commit further crimes. So I'm certain that the Ethiopian government, or under the Abiy Ahmed regime, is going to use this election as once as they did last time, as an excuse to amass more power and to wage war against each other. But again, important to understand marginalized groups in Tigray will be the target.
Tsedale, is that a fair analysis? And as far as the external threats are concerned, do you worry about how involved Ethiopia will be in neighboring conflicts, including Sudan and issues with Somalia? How cynical could Abiy Ahmed's involvement be in external conflicts like that?
I worry. A lot of people worry as well. I've been in communication with a lot of diplomats since the last 2 days, and the telltale sign of that is the way with which the election itself was framed, the number of registered voters, the sweeping nature of the peacefulness of the election, and the emphasis on the uncontested mandate this election is going to bestow upon the ruling party. So if you look into those anecdotes, you would understand that the Ethiopian public at large were positioned to accept the ruling party as the one that they have willingly bestowed upon to pursue the political agenda of the ruling party. What are these political agenda that we have been comprehending with in the last few months? It is access to the Red Sea, a sovereign access to the Red Sea. It is now framed as a national interest, so much so that even the media cannot say anything about what is framed as a national interest by the ruling party, right? So Ethiopians are positioned to believe in that. So now with this election result, what I fear will happen is that the party will be emboldened to say, the Ethiopians have given me a to pursue what is a national agenda, what is a national interest of Ethiopia. Amongst the leading one is this sovereign access to the Red Sea. Nobody knows if that could happen without stirring the Horn of Africa, without adding more tension and adding fuel to the fire in the whole region. So for that reason, I worry, and a lot of people worry as well.
So let me finally ask Robel then, Amhara conflict aside, what do you worry about as far as the national interest is concerned, and what Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed might do with what they claim to be national interest?
Thank you, Andrea. We've actually seen, I think, a very clear message from the Ethiopian public. We've seen protests over the past 2 months across over 50 cities and towns in 10 countries, including Ethiopia, denouncing the election under the slogan, "No ballots while bullets fly." So was there an election? Technically, yes. Was it a democratic one that was free and fair? Absolutely not. Will Ahmed gain a mandate to transform the country? Well, the trend of the past few years says not for the better. If it's anything like what happened after the 2021 elections, we could see a worsening of Ethiopia's existing problems. And I think it's very important to note that at the moment, Ahmed is a destabilizing actor and a proxy of the United Arab Emirates under Mohammed bin Zayed. So he is actually acting as an agent, not only just to destabilize Ethiopia, but even neighboring countries. In recent months, we saw very credible reports of RSF training facilities in Ethiopia being managed by the Ethiopian National Defense Force to intensify and worsen the civil conflict in neighboring Sudan. You had an MOU with Somaliland, which triggered tensions with Somalia. You have increasing tension with Eritrea. So Abiy is really a force of instability in the country and in the broader region. And unfortunately, he is being enabled by the UAE and other patrons. So it's very, very critical for the international community to step in to address the destabilizing role of the UAE through Abiy as a proxy in the region.
Okay, Robel Alemu, so much more to discuss on that front. Very unfortunately, we are completely out of time. For this edition of the Newsmakers, I'd like to thank all three of you so much for being with me, our viewers for joining us as well. Remember, you can follow us on social media. Do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.